Great, and we're recording. Hi everyone, my name is Ari. I'm coming to you here from my tiny apartment in Chicago. For those who don't know me, I have coming into this class with 18 years of martial arts experience, the past 12 of which have been focused on historical swordplay. The topic of this class is specifically aimed at the spada due mani of the Bolognese system. So this is, the spada due mani just means sword in two hands. They don't at the time define spadone or side sword or rapier. They just have swords, and then they have those two-handed swords, and that's it. They get really into detail with pole arms and how like this thing with like some wings on it is different than this other one, this slightly trident thing, and this spear is this thing. Or they'll divide shields a bunch, give your targe and your buckler, but swords are just one-handed or two-handed. So the pictures we have from Marozzo, which is one of the two treatises that talk about this, show what's now referred to as a spadone, which is like, I don't know, about that high, 5'10", right? Like the modern replica is generally like a 45-inch blade, and this is a 40-inch. Oh, hey, oh, look, Patrick has one nearby because he has more space and budget than I do. Thanks, Patrick, appreciate it. We are going to be looking at applying the ideas from that into more of a longsword context. This is because when I had a car, only this would fit in it, and B, because anything much larger than this, and it stops being safe to go at full speeds. I'm able to use, like I have successfully used these techniques, both in a full speed sparring context, both the SCA and HEMA, as well as in tournament combat. If you bring out a 5-pound, 45-inch bladed sword, it's not going to be safe to use. So we're going to be taking these techniques, but we're applying it to some other tools. But it's important to note, so we have Marozzo shows this one sword. The Anonymous Bolognese doesn't have any pictures, but is the only other treatise to talk about the weapon in the Bolognese system specifically. But they do mention how a lot of these techniques come from earlier materials, which kind of implies that you'd be using more of a long sword to do this and will work as well. So the Bolognese are happening at a very interesting time in history. Bologna is still around now, by the way. But the Bolognese schools, we have the first written record happening by a man named Dardi, who's teaching in the mid-15th century. He's attached to the University of Bologna, which is the first university in Europe, although that term gets used loosely, which started like the 11th century. We don't have any books from him, and we don't know of any of his students. We have other people teaching in the same city, but we don't know if they are related at all. So we end up having 4 masters, which we have books. There's the Anonymous Bolognese, which is possibly attributed to Antonio di Luca, which is likely written around 1510, it's never published. We have both Marozzo and Manciolino, who were published in the mid-1530s, and then we have Giovanni del Gocchia, who shows up a few decades later. I'm going to be pulling from all of these because they're all complementary to each other, and they all fill in some gaps. Marozzo is the most comprehensive, right? It's this giant, like, thick text, and it's also the worst written thing on earth. Tom Leone once referred to as Marozzo as the boom power of Italian swordsmanship. Like, it's painful to trudge through. There's all these like guards he uses that he doesn't explain. He wrote it for his son to review after he died. So there's a lot of filling in the gaps that some of the other texts are going to have us do. So with that said, we're going to start the war off. So for those of you who have swords, you can put your sword down. We're going to start by just having some arm circles forwards. And backwards. And we're going to go side to side. So one of the important things with warming up, for those of you who don't know, my regular job is I'm a circus performer. you're gonna reach up, is you want to use dynamic exercises. You want to use stuff that gets you moving. Static exercises, so static stretching, like sitting in the splits, is really bad before you're about to do something. You're gonna reach down and across and back up. Right, if you just sit there in a static stretch, it's gonna temporarily weaken your muscles and increases the chances of injury. They're really good if you want to increase flexibility. Make sure you're popping back up in between reaching down. It's good, static stretches are good for increasing flexibility after you've finished exercise, but they're really bad if you're about to do a thing. Since we're about to move around a bunch, we're not gonna statically stretch anything. Cool, and put your hands on your waist, and we're gonna make a circle. And the other way. And shake everything out. Cool. For this next thing, you might want to find a wall to lean against. It depends how good your balance is. We're going to do leg swings. So you need a wall, grab the wall. My wall just comes out of frame, so I'm just going to stand in the middle. And you're just going to kick your leg forwards and back. Now kicking this chair behind me. Great. Switch legs. Cool, go back to your first leg. If we're gonna swing sideways, it might help to turn your bottom foot out a bit so you don't torque your bottom knee. And switch legs. Cool, so the next thing is gonna be familiar for anyone with a dance background. It's called a drop swing. So you're gonna start with your arms up, lift all the way from the balls of your feet. You're gonna drop down, bounce, bounce again, and come back up. Great, and then for our next thing, we're gonna warm up our forearms. I'm gonna tilt the camera down a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Ignore my messy bed in the picture. So I want you to get in some sort of like a knee push-up position. You're going to rest, instead of having your hands flat on the ground, you're gonna go on your fingertips. And from here, you're gonna rock forwards and back. The nice thing about this is you can control how much weight you're putting into it, right? If you want to go more, you can lean more into it, not, whatever. And go side to side. And go in a circle one way. And the other way. Great, shake out your hands. So the next thing we're gonna do is gonna be from the same position, but now with your hands flat. It's called cat-cow. It's gonna warm up your back. So you're gonna push your ribs down like a cow and push it back up like a cat trying to switch. But don't stay in either spot too long. And make sure your head is going with it. So when you're pushing your ribs down, you look up. When you push your ribs up, you look down. Great. And stand back up. Shake out everything you want to. If you have a specific warm-up you want to do, feel free to do it now. I'm going to reposition my camera so that my head is actually in these.
You can unplug it, it's all charged.
How's everyone feeling? Cool. So today is going to be a lot of terminology. The Bolognese loved naming everything, and none of which in like an easily, like not like in with numbers or like the easiest to learn system, especially for those of us who don't speak Italian. So today we're going to learn a lot of terminology. So the first part should be pretty familiar to anyone who's studied any form of Italian swordsmanship, but we're going to go over it because it's day one. So this is a sword. Yes, yeah, sword. Right, we have the pommel, which we will go over some techniques with. We'll be covering both stuff that's allowed in tournament combat, and then depending where you are, not allowed in tournament combat. Right, we have our pommel, we have our handle or grip, we have our kions. Some of the more modern like trainers, we have this thing called a schild, which is German, which shows up in swords battalions anyhow. We have the blade. The blade we can divide two different ways. Right, if we cut it in half this way, we have the forte, or the fort, which is the strong. Right, this is the keeping you alive half. And then we have the debole, the weak, which is the murdering half. The reason it does that is because you don't have any muscles inside of your sword, you only have muscles in your body. So the further away this thing is from where my muscles are, the things that are pushing it, the more it's just working as a lever. Feel free to, at home, push down with this arm, with the other hand by the tip, and then try it with the other hand by the hilt. If you have another person, it'll be a lot easier to do that, and you can't lie to yourself with your own hands. After that, we have the point, which I have this rubber tip on because I use it against the people that I like. And then we have the true edge and the false edge. So unlike with some other swords, such as this handy dandy side sword, right, where you can clearly look at the sword and see which edge is going to do which, long swords are nice and symmetrical. So the true edge is going to be defined based where your top hand's knuckles point, right? So if you're a lefty, it's going to be like, they'll generally point the same direction, but when you're moving around, your bottom hand is more likely to change. So I'm going to define it based off the top hand's knuckles. They don't really talk about, the Bolognese authors don't really talk about lefties, but it doesn't mean that this won't work for you. We're going to define everything based off our native and non-native side, as opposed to defining things based necessarily off right and left. And you can use the same, like you can use all the terms they're using with the idea of native and non-native. So the true edge of the blade is whichever edge of your knuckles point. This is the edge you're going to do. This is your workhorse. You're going to do most of your work with this. That side that the Bolognese are known for using the false edge a bunch. The false edge, right, they would both be sharp on a sword like this, but the false edge, right, it's mechanically not strong. The important thing to note here is the Bolognese are one of the first historic systems we have aimed at civilian combat. The only armor we have in any of these sources is either they vaguely reference saying, like you would in armor, without going into any more detail, or the Nanima Bolognese has a section on the sword in one hand and the armored glove, which I'm not going to grab my gauntlet for. Otherwise, they are walking around in civilian clothing. This is contrasted with someone like Fiore, who is trying to teach a more knightly class. Right. By this point, the printing press in Europe has now been around for 60 plus years. China has been ahead by a couple hundred years because they're smarter. Sorry, I have an East Asia history minor. So you have the printing press in Europe. You have a rising middle class, right? In Germany, you have the burghers, which is where we get the word bourgeoisie from. They're having access to these things. They can pay for fencing lessons. You don't have to be a landed royal in order to be able to access these materials, either from a personal, like an instructor, or just from a book, right? And we see like Morozzo gets reprinted a bunch of times in decades past this. Any questions on like the overall history bit? Cool. So yeah, you're gonna see a lot more false edge attacks because it doesn't have to deal with like heavy doublets and armor. So the first thing is gonna be how we stand. So the Bolognese are gonna have one leg forward. The legs are gonna switch. So I'm gonna make you like use both, but take one leg, put it in front of you. You're gonna push your hips towards your opponent. You're going to put the majority of your weight on your front foot. And I often find that my off-handed side, I'm either going to be putting my hand on my waist like this or like this. I don't really have a preference. If you have a specific one, go for it. I know some schools say don't do this because it like puts your fingers in the way of potential harm. My opinion is that if someone's going to hit me with a sword over here anyhow, I've already messed up. And this is the far side, but to each their own. I generally don't recommend what you see in some manuals of going like this. I think it forces this shoulder to actively engage. And I want to be as loose as possible. Right. And also just like, I have to think about it sitting there. Right. And I don't want to use up any brain space for this other arm. Whereas here or here, I find I can do without thinking as much. That happens more in the one-handed stuff. With a two-handed sword, you're not going to deal with that. But it's good to know because these are all part of a larger system. You want to create a mechanical chain happening from this hand, or yes, mostly the top hand, through this elbow, through this shoulder, into the opposite sided hip, into the back knee, into the foot. This is the same in all systems, but we're just going to use this as an example. Right, we are trying to find ways to use mechanical advantage and our bone structure to move people around. Now, like with any martial system, being really strong will help you. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that like working out will in no way affect your tournament score, because like it will. But that said, the point of this class is not to teach you how to be the strongest person possible. The point of this class is to teach you how to use the sword most effectively. I know several people like in their mid to late 60s who can still beat on whippersnappers like me with using these techniques. And I find that a more interesting question than who can do the most push-ups. So we're using our mechanics to make this happen. There's a few things to pick up our sword. There's a few things to note. Oftentimes you'll see people flare their elbows to the outside. Please don't do this. I was watching Star Trek Picard earlier, and you see the same thing. You see like the bad like German Vom Tag stance from like one of the guys, which like my Kion is going to stab me in the shoulder, and B, it's not very strong. C, it's not a full Vom Tag, and D, my elbows are now really exposed. So by standing here, right, if we do this, we are now using our deltoids and our rotator cuffs as opposed to our lats. Our lats are a much bigger muscle. We want big muscles to beat small muscles. Also, my elbows are now a target. Right, I want the least possible lines that my opponent can hit. So we're gonna go over the guards in a second, but I want you to try moving your sword around your body, especially now that you can see yourself in the camera, and see what you can do to keep those elbows tucked in. Now, it's not that they'll never go past your body, but like if you're bending a lot like this, it's going to be bad. Great. And I really like the nice thing about this class, or if you're ever in a studio that has a mirror, like use that tool to your advantage and like see what you are doing right now. Cool. So, question? Yes, no? Great. Okay, we're gonna get into the guards. Before that, if you don't have access to a longsword, that's fine. They're really expensive. If you're at home, feel free to use a broom handle or whatever you can. My only advice for those of you who have a non-sword-like sword trainer is to clearly delineate the edges, right? I was in a side sword class the other day, and the instructor was using a stick. And the problem with that is you can't always see where the true and false edges are, and it allows you to develop some bad technique. So if you don't have a sword-like simulator, at least draw something on it so you know which edge is which, because we don't want to be pairing things with the flat so much, right? Our hands don't want to do this thing, they want to go forwards. So there's, depending on which author you're reading, there's somewhere between 15 and 24 guards. Not all of them are well described, particularly by Morozzo, particularly in a two-handed sword section. He often just kind of like references it as if you would know it. And sometimes other authors fill in those gaps, sometimes they don't. The Anonymous Bolognese is similarly guilty of these problems where at least the Anonymous lays out most of the guards early on for the one-handed sword section, but then when the author gets to the two-handed sword section, they just kind of show up with a bunch of extra guards that they didn't tell you what they are. So we've gotten much better at technical writing since, and it's very clear that these were not written for a modern audience to recreate from the ground up without anyone to guide them. But that said, we still have to go through that task anyhow. So assuming you're gonna, so you grab your sword, I tend to take a grip closer to the pommel with my bottom hand. So I'm not coming underneath the pommel. I'm generally not up here. There always has to be some space though. This is gonna be bad. If you want to be here, that's fine. I tend to find being a little close to the pommel allows me to move around faster as I get more leverage. But if you have a grip that works for you a little better, as long as there is space between your hands, go for it. I will also say that you want the smallest bit of space between your hands and the keons. Scott from Darkwood was once in a class of his, and he was like, if you are perfect, you can hold your sword like this. If you are not perfect, do this little thing and your hands will be a lot happier. I know that we all use gauntlets nowadays when we're fighting each other, because that's the smart thing and they're pretty easily accessible. These techniques are supposed to be against unarmored people. You even see in Meyer, who is publishing around the same time as Don Gautier, in his tournament combat, the strikes to the hands, even with dull swords, are only with the flat. Because everyone he's talking to are people who work with their hands, they're guildsmen. So you want to be nice to both our opponents and ourselves. And just creating that little bit of space is going to save you from a bunch of hand shots that roll just a little over the heel. So with our dominant leg forward, I'm going to assume everyone has the same arm and leg that are dominant. Some people don't. I know it's more common where their arm and their eye are different ones. You see this a lot when people do archery or target shooting. That matters less. But for the purposes of this, we're going to pretend that our dominant arm and our dominant leg are the same. So we're going to start with those 9 guards that happen around this space, and then we'll get to the more out there ones in a second. So now we're holding here. If our tip is down, maybe it's down behind us a little bit, maybe it's down in front, doesn't really matter. This is going to be coda longa y larga. Your coda longa guards are going to be on this side. So larga just meaning wide. The next one, so if we bring the tip up, so our hilt is mostly at the same spot. It's a little above, see it relative to my waist. You have coda longa y stretta. So stretta is narrow, the stretta guards are the ones where the point is in presence. In the Bolognese system, you have gioco stretto and you have gioco largo, which gioco meaning play. And this is different than the later period idea of misura, in that gioco largo can be here, and gioco stretto can be here without any difference between like how far away we are from each other. So coda longa e larga, coda longa e stretta, and then coda longa alta. Alta just means high, right? So my arm is a little below shoulder height. The next are Porta de Ferro guards, so Porta de Ferro being iron gate. Both coda longa and Porta de Ferro are terms that Fiore uses. So these have like been in the Italian canon for a couple hundred years at this point, or well, no, like 110, 130. But they aren't used the same, which gets really annoying if you know one of these systems and you're trying to read another one. So Porta de Ferro, you're gonna come to the inside, just the inside of your knee. So we have Porta de Ferro larga, Porta de Ferro stretta, and Porta de Ferro alta. And I don't want to be just down the center. I'm going to be angling in, right? My true edge is going to be facing a little to the inside. For those of you with a rapier background, right? We're going to have our sword in almost a terza quarta. So the next guards are shown with the opposite leg forward. You could also interpret them. I know some folks have done it. We're just over this left side, or over your non-native side. But what we're going to do, as it's shown in the books for now, is we have Cinghare Porta de Ferro larga. So we're covering our inside line. Our tip is going to angle off that way. Cinghare Porta de Ferro stretta. And Cinghare Porta de Ferro alta. So that's a lot of Italian words, especially for an audience who probably doesn't speak Italian. Once you look at the pieces though, and you figure those out, it's a lot easier to remember these. I don't have like an easy mnemonic, but we know that larga, right, our point is going to be down, not a little bit behind us. Stretta are kind of my default guards, right? I bring my point into presence. Right, if you've done rapier at all, right, you're like vaguely going to do your like showing up like a Capaferro or like a Gigante level pointing to sort of people. And then alta is going to be a little bit higher. Right, so we have larga, stretta, alta. And we have coda longa, which is our outside line, Porta de Ferro, which is our inside line, and Cinghare Porta de Ferro, which is our inside line, both our other foot forwards. Those are the 9 guards we're going to spend most, like the primary amount of time with, but I'm going to add a few more on for today. So the next one is coda longa distesa, which is going to be similar. So we have our dominant side. We're going to switch legs for a second, right? So we had our coda longa larga, coda longa distesa, which will be our non-dominant side forward, and our tip all the way back here. My upstairs neighbors are having a party. Cool. Don't know if anyone can hear that. But now this might seem odd, but we have our sword all the way back here. This is going to be used a lot more for transitions. So when I throw a reversa, if I want to throw a full cut, I might come here and then come around and do something. But if you're really cocky, you can show up to a fight like this. It shows up a little more in one-handed work, right? Where if I have a buckler out here, I can bring my sword back more safely. But it shows up in the 2 intersections. So this is coda longa distesa, right? So our coda longa guards are still on this outside. The next ones is we have, and this is going to change a little bit from how they're defined in the one-handed section, is we have guardia intrare, our entering guard. So guardia intrare is going to be on our Porta de Ferro side, and our point is going to be at our opponent. And we don't want, right, we don't want our hands too far out here. We want our hilt slightly above our head. And we want our pommel to be slightly above like our forward hand. An important thing to note, and this is going to happen more when we get to cuts, is it's really okay to relax the bottom 3 fingers of your top hand. if you keep an iron grip on it and you try and make all these rotations, your wrist will hate you. Ask me how I know. Right, so if you're up here, it's not gonna be as drastic, but instead of being here, right, my pinky's gonna come off a little bit. This is gonna be dependent a little bit on like your sword and your hands, but feel free to relax your top hand a little bit. So we have Guardia di Entrare up here, and then the other side, we switch feet, right? So our non-dominant foot is forwards, and we have Guardia di Croce, right? Guard of the cross, because our arms are crossed. These are all the guards we're going to come into a fight from a lot. They're going to be a little less natural for people with a rapier background, which I know a lot of you are, but they're going to be important nonetheless. The next one, so we're going to see how well I can do in ceiling, is we have Guardia di Testa, which is guard of the head. So my sword is angled forwards. This differs from the one-handed Guardia di Testa, which is here. You'll notice that I can use this to either side. Right, it's going to be a little weaker on my false edge side, but it should still work pretty well, especially if I do a collection into here. Guardia Alto, which I definitely don't have space for, so I'm going to kneel down. We're going to do this stand. If you have space, stand up. That's my fan. Is either straight up or a little back. We're not going to worry about that because I can't demonstrate it with the tools I have. It's nice for posing. The thing about Alta is you can go anywhere from it. You can cut either direction, you can have an imbrocata, you can do something else. So it's a nice guard to think in or to use as a transition. But because a lot of us are stuck in very tiny apartments, I'm not going to make people destroy their ceiling fans, aka mine, with Guardia Alta a lot. There's a few other guards that are mentioned in the texts. It's like a Guardia di Fianchi, which is just Porta de Ferro, but our like hilt or pommel rests on our hip. There's like Marotta shows us like here the stop-up alarm. We're not going to super worry about those for the moment. And there's also a bunch of ones that he very, very poorly defines. Some of which show up a bunch, some of which like not really, and we're not going to worry too much about them because we already have 15 guards to work on. Are there any questions on where all of the guards are so far? Cool. So if I tell you to go into Bolognese stretta, what does that look like? Yeah. Finn, aren't you left-handed? Is it mirrored?
No, I'm going right-handed.
Okay. Cool. So Patrick, you missed it. I'm calling out guards and making you go into them. So, Codalonga stretta. So our stretta guards, our point is going to be in presence. So this is going to be Codalonga larga, this is going to be Codalonga stretta. Guardia Entrare. So Guardia Entrare is going to be to our non-dominant side. It's going to be above our head. Our point is at our opponent. Guardia di Croce. Yeah, everyone got that. Cool. Codalonga di Stesa. So if you remember, our Codalonga guards are all going to be on our outside, and then di Stesa is going to get our tip trailing behind us. Porta de Ferro alta. So I see a few different guesses. So our Porta de Ferro guards are going to be on our inside, and unless it has Chimpare in front of it, it's going to be at the right foot forwards. Alta is going to be a little below your shoulders. We're not going to get into Entrare yet. Chinghare is like Fiore uses the term dente al Chinghara, which is like boar's tooth, because, right, these come in at these angles. So we have like a similar imagery happening here, but not to the same degree. Like Fiore uses a lot of animalistic imagery, which you see happening in other cultures a ton. By this point in like European linguistics, it's happening a bit less, but we still have some of these older terms that are getting recycled. Chinghare Porta de Ferro y Larga. So if Chinghare means we're going to have our off-sided foot forwards, Porta de Ferro is going to be on our inside line, right? So even though I've switched feet, we're still going to define this as my inside line. And Larga is going to get the point down. Guardia di Testa. Yeah, cool. There's no hints from the other ones to help you figure that one out, but it's good to be able to do regardless. Guardia Alta. Cool. I just wanted to make sure you all could do it. We're not going to use it a ton, as I've already broken one lamp in a class. Hopefully my landlord doesn't watch this video. And I don't want to do that again because I don't have any shoes on and glass is bad. Great. So those are all of the guards we have to worry about for right now. There's a couple other ones that like Marozzo uses specifically, but Marozzo's a peacock. Like he specifically has like Becca Chesa. He has like a couple versions of like Diallo Corno, which is this one with one hand, but they're essentially just like lower, with two hands, there's lower versions of Guardia di Croce. And in my own pedagogy, I haven't found that division to be helpful, and it doesn't show up in the other authors. So we're not gonna worry about them because like, it's gonna get in the way. Like I said, there's, if you count it all, there's 24, but like, oh, it gets annoying. Cool. So we have, what did I say, 15-ish guards. Someone after this is watching it and recording and realizes my math is off. Feel free to correct me. We have, depending on how you count it, 9 to 11 cuts, I think. So let's say we show up to this fight in Guardia di Croce. So we're going to use descending cuts to make our life a little easier. So Guardia di Croce, not Entrare. Patrick, switch sides. You doing? Oh, is your thing mirrored? Okay. Video's weird. We're going Guardia di Croce. We're going to throw what's called a mandritto. So mandritto cut is going to be from our native to our non-native sign. And we're going to do it with a passing step forwards. Oh, I'm the mirrored one. That's why it's off. Okay, never mind. So there's a few things, and I want you to end in Porta de Ferro Larga. So when throwing this cut or any cut, there's a few important things to remember. When going forwards, the sword is always going to initiate the action. George Silver talks about true and false times. So his false time is what you see happening in tournaments all the time, where people move their foot first. False time shows up more in where we're using impact weapons. So if you look at like SCA rattan fighting, for instance, where I have to hit with a certain calibration, right? I want to power it with my hip and create this whip that's going to come around straight through something. When we have sharp swords and people out of armor, it doesn't need to do that. We just need to get the sword there really quickly. And we also want to not get hit in the process. So if I am here, right, I'm initiating this cut with my sword, and then almost finishing it before I step through. The next part to think about when throwing these cuts, and I'm using this mandrito as an example, is I want to keep my hands safe. This is especially hard to do with this minimalistic hilt. Right, it's very easy to do, I can cheat when I do this. But if you're using this and we're only wearing armor for training purposes, but we're assuming that we're supposedly not in armor, a lot of people, similarly, when they want to create that big forceful impact, extend with the hands first and then have the blade come through. Don't do that. Right, I'm keeping my hilt in front of my hands. So we can do this as a full cut coming all the way down. And you can do it either with this pass forward, or you can do it with a volta stabile, a stable turn with the hips, right? My arms move first, and then my hips go. So try it both as this full cut we talked about, but I want you to also try it as a half cut, right? And the Bolognese define these full and half cuts as where your point ends up. So a full cut is your point is out of presence, a half cut is your point is in presence. So if we go from quote to croci to cinghare ponte di ferro stretta, or if we want to pass through ponte di ferro stretta, I'm trying to keep my hands safe. The next bit that's going to be helpful, and this is slightly more for how we practice nowadays against other people, as opposed to if I actually wanted to cleave through someone's skull, is we're going to throw what's called a spinto. Now, a spinto is a push cut. This is not the SCA, you lay this thing here and then you go like that, push cut. I'm pushing through my opponent as I go forwards. Right, it's going to hit their mask and it's going to glance off of it. This is going to be a lot nicer to, right, we often have an issue with calibration, right, where people just go through, but if I know I'm going to be hitting this target, I'm almost punching with the forte of my true edge and pushing forwards. So A, my partner is not going to receive as hard of a blow, and B, the spinto cut keeps my hands safe. And you can try it both, right, just turning with the balls to the feet, that volta stabile, or you can try it passing forwards into ponte di ferro stretta. I'm going to watch you guys for a bit. So Patrick, you're kind of snapping your wrists at the end. Try not to do that, as A, your wrists will be angry at you for arresting the motion. And B, I think you might have missed this part where you're talking about the spinto, right, this kind of push and cut, where it's more helpful nowadays when I don't want to murder people, where I push off their mask instead of through them. Yeah, there we go, that's much better. You see often with people crossing over from more like impactful things, specifically SC armor combat to steel combat, like what we're trying to create, not like the Battle of Nations steel combat, HEMA, SCA cut and thrust, is they switch the imagery in their head from cutting like past the person, right? Or like you're in karate, you punch the wall that's behind the person. And they switch that image to hitting just that person's clothes, right? Just the tip of, like just the edge of that person. Because we just need to prove that I can hit you with a sword. I don't need to dent your mask. Like, please don't. Like, if there's one thing in the world we can change with sword fighting, like, please be nicer to your opponents. We don't need concussions. It doesn't make you manlier. Please don't. Thanks. Sorry, slight rant. So, we have this cut going on. Now I should try the same thing from the other side. So if we're in Guardian Try, we're gonna throw what's called a reverso. So reverso is gonna be from your non-native to your native side. So we can try it both as a full cut, right? And this full cut is going to end up in coda longa larga, or if we really want to commit to it, coda longa distesa. Or we can go to porta per stretta, to coda longa stretta or coda longa larga, depending where we're hitting. If we want to throw this half cut. The Bolognese system, compared to some of the earlier ones, spends a lot more time with the point in presence. You don't see a lot of these like posta bidona kind of guards. The main reason for this is you're only ever fighting like these. The spadone is like a guard's weapon or is used in dueling, right? And all of the plays are really just talking about one-on-one combat. So, right, I might want something here, and I might be throwing these more committed, larger cuts, like to deal with a field of people. And I don't know if there's someone, right? If there's someone behind me, I can switch really fast. But if I know where the opponent is at all times, I can just sit my sword on them. Also, because of so much what we're doing is only recreating one-on-one unarmored fighting, I have found the Bolognese to work particularly well for our like contemporary sparring and tournament environments, as opposed to some of the earlier Leftenauer or Fiore systems that are more multi-purpose tools as opposed to specialists, as opposed to being for specialists. And if all we're doing is just doing one-on-one unarmored combat, I think like this system is particularly well suited for it. Right. Similarly, right, I talked about Meyer earlier hitting the flat. Right. He's doing that to adapt to his specific tournament environment. So it's important when reading these resources to like figure out where these techniques are going and like who they're trying to be used against. You've seen some of the earlier stuff, for instance, it's like in armored combat. I do this thing, I strip your sword away, I put you in this headlock, and I walk you off the field. Right, and I'm doing this not because it's the most effective way to kill you, but because you're worth a lot of money, and I want to ransom you, and that's going to be my objective now. So we're from Guardia Trove, we're throwing this reversa. We're keeping our hands behind our hilt. We're initiating with the sword. Great, now I'm going to make us go the other way. So we both have descending blows and we have ascending blows. So the ascending blows are going to be called a ridoppio. So if I'm in coda longa stretta and I want to cut up into guardia entrare, it's going to be called a mandritto. So mandritto is defining the side, ridoppio. We can imagine ourselves doing this to strike our opponent in the hands, or to catch the opponent's sword in order to thrust. All right, come on, a little edit challenge. You can start in like coda longa distesa or coda longa larga. And notice, especially, I'm keeping that back elbow in, right? We don't want a chicken wing out here. Right, and then if we go from the other side, so if we're in porta de ferro larga, and we cut up into guardia di proci, right, this is going to be our reverso ridoppio. So reverso being our backhand, right, like a backhanded strike like thing in tennis, or from our non-native to our native side. And then ridoppio being this rising cut. Cool, I'm gonna add one more thing. So when we're advancing, we want to be moving the sword and then the body. When we're retreating, this changes a little bit. So if I have cut up into guardia di proci and I was wrong and I need to back out, because the priority is getting my body to a place of safety, as opposed to just controlling my opponent's sword, I'm going to step back and cut at the same time. So if we cut forwards with the sword moving and then the foot, we cut backwards together. You can try it nice and slow, look in your precision. You can speed it up a little bit if you want more of a challenge. Up to you. Once you're done on that side a bunch, switch sides. So you're going to cut that Raddoppio Mandritto, and then that reverso coming down. You can start high and go, you can like start low and then cut up high, or you can start high and cut down low, whichever way you want. Try and do both at some point. Now, some people might comment that my bringing my sword into presence, separate from my foot, is slower, right? It takes more time to do. While this isn't necessarily wrong, it misses the point, right? The point is not purely to get my sword into my opponent as fast as possible. The point is to neutralize their sword, and only after that am I allowed to hit them. If you haven't controlled their sword or made it so it can't hit you, it doesn't matter what you do to them. Like, if you die, you're wrong. Right, there's this very clear measurement at the end of the duel, which is like, one of us walked away. There's a bunch of other measurements, like whether you like fought well, and there's a bunch of social conditions. But like, if you're in a fight and you can't walk away from that fight, it doesn't matter what you did to them. So by doing this, right, I am securing their sword and only then coming to strike them. And you'd be surprised how fast it can still see. But don't rush that foot just because you think it'll go faster. So if you come back to one of our high guards for a second, there's actually two different descending blows. So Fiore just has his fendente, which he describes as cutting from the head or cutting from the eye to the knee. Just beautiful imagery right there. So the Bolognese have this fendente. They also have, and this is what they use as their default cut, so if they just say Mandritto Reverso, this is what they mean. They have the Squillambrato. Right, so the Squillambrato is going to be more of this 45 degrees. So try from one of these high guards, cutting that fendente line, and cutting that Squillambrato line. So a fendente might be better if you're trying to aim for the head, but a Squillambrato is going to help you a little more if you're trying to strike them in the hands. And there's a lot of striking people in the hands. If anyone's ever gotten a chance to pick up Stephen Freitas' translation of the Anonimo, like, I want to say like a quarter and like a third of the Anonimo's responses with the sword in two hands is step back and throw a half cut into their hands. Because it turns out these are nice, meaty targets with very tiny bones. And if they can't hold a sword, the fight's over. Right, and try, there's just the one Raddoppio, but try going from the Squillambrato to the Raddoppio, and the Fendente to the Raddoppio. One extra challenge, right? Try stepping back and forwards, and then forwards and back. So you're doing the same 2 cuts, you're switching your footwork. So far we have our Andente, we have our Scollambrato, we have our Ridoppio. The next cut, and you're not going to see it a ton, this happens more not as an initial action, but as an after the fact kind of thing, is the tondo. The tondo is cutting straight across. So oftentimes, if an opponent has done an action where they lifted up, right, I might tondo under. There's one really great move in Marozzo where you feint high and then duck and tondo them in the shins. So for those of you who are watching HEMA videos, you're like, that never happens. There's documentation. It's totally a thing. I don't recommend it, but it is a documentable thing you can do. Please don't hit people in the shins, it really hurts. But even though, even there, right, we see I'm not coming out with this tondo. The problem with the tondo is it's really bad at being in the way of their sword. But, right, if I've thrown this feint to their head and I go high, then I can tondo low, or then I can tondo to their hands, or to the body. One of the interesting things we see, so with a sword in one hand, you see cuts to the limbs and to the head, but only thrusts to the body. With the sword in 2 hands, you get to cut people in the body. They don't really explain why this is the thing, but we can make some inferences in that there's enough mass that even if you're wearing a doublet, I can do, not an arming doublet, just an everyday clothing, right? I can do enough damage to your torso with this for it to be a fight ender. Whereas, right, this significantly smaller sword, right, if I throw a cut to your body, you might bleed a little bit and you'll be angry, and then you're going to kill me. But with this, there's enough force that your day is going to be ruined if I cut through your rib with this thing. So try cutting that tondo both ways. Right, and you can throw the tondo up high, right? Because you could feint low and then up high. Right, and this kind of German's work copter thing people talk about. You can cut this tondo lower. On the the tip can point down a little bit on the tondo, that's fine. It's just describing the path of travel is along this flat axis, even if the point is a little higher or a little lower. We're not going to use tondos a lot, but they're good to know. So those are all of the true edge cuts. We have the fendente, the scollambrato, the tondo, and the ridoppio. There are also 3 explicitly defined false edge cuts, which isn't to say that you can't do the other ones with the false edge, but that if these are mentioned, we know that they're going to be false edge. So the first one is the falso dritto, which is my least favorite cut on earth. So dritto being from mandritto. So if I'm in, for instance, codalonga distesa, I can cut with this false edge. I want to step off to the side of it. This action. An important thing to note is you want to do this mostly with the shoulders. You try and do this cut primarily with your wrists will hate you. Please don't this is bad. Right, and this might be used to deflect their sword. So if they're cutting reverso at my head, I can step out of the way and cut the false edge of their sword, deflecting out of the way. Or I can do this into their hands. Right, this is not a killing blow. This is an inconveniencing blow. But if I inconvenience you through your little hand bones, I win. Try not to hit this chair. I'm going to scoot it back a little bit. So we have our falso dritto, which I hate. We also have our falso manco, which doesn't say falso reverso, it says falso manco. I don't speak Italian, I don't know why, but we're gonna roll with the terms anyhow. So the falso manco is a lot more natural. It comes on this side. Right, we're almost like throwing, not quite throwing the sword like over our shoulder, but it's taking this path, right? It's, if we throw this skull and brato coming down, we're gonna throw the falso manco on that same path. This is a credit, like, I use this a bunch to knock people's swords out of the way. And if I'm really, really being mean, someone sets up and I just pop them in the hands like that and they look sad, like a puppy who just got his toys taken away. Like the most anticlimactic thing you can do with longsword against someone who's all armored up, you just go, whoop. And remembering to have our sword go ahead of our body when we're going forwards. You could theoretically do this. Yeah, you can do this going back as well, I guess. It's just gonna not show up as much because it doesn't set us up as well. And you can also turn one of these falsi into a ridoppio, right? So especially on the falso dritto side, I can meet with this false edge and then turn my sword into introid, right? Because this doesn't set me up well for the thrust, but if I want to capture their sword and then come in, right, I can go that way. And similarly with the falso manco, I can falso manco up into guardia di croce. You're going to use this a little more on the falso dritto side just because it is a weaker cut. But it's good to know both sides. And then our final cut is the montante. So oftentimes, like the larger swords are called montante. The sword is named after the move. I think it has something to do with like getting on a horse, like riding. My like Italian is terrible. But you're just cutting with the false straight up, right? It's a big deflecting action. Capoferro has this same term like 100 years later, and he uses his true edge. That's not what they mean right now. So like, don't be deceived by Capoferro. All right. I might do this as I step off. It looks kind of silly because your sword comes at your face. Cool. Shake everything out, grab some water. How are folks feeling thus far? Are there any questions? I've made you memorize a lot of Italian words. Cool, okay, let's keep going now.
Arik, I'll probably have to feed my family, but you're doing this on recording, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll catch up with the rest on the video, all right?
Okay, sounds good. Hopefully I'll be up by tomorrow.
Okay, hey, thank you a bunch.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, Ben, it's just you and me. So, gotta get a share out of the way. So far we've been doing, all right, without me mentioning it, you've probably been doing all these cuts we call concordantly. So if, for instance, we have our left foot forwards and we're in guardia di croce, right? A concordant mandritto would be moving our right foot forwards. This is what's gonna feel most natural, and it's also gonna be structurally stronger. We can, however, go the opposite way with a discordant action. So if my left foot is forwards and I'm in guardia di croce, all right, I can step forwards with that left foot. It's gonna feel weird. So I'm gonna move the camera just for a second so you can see something. There's a specific thing we do for this, which is gonna feel wrong for rapier fighters, but it feels so right for side sword people. So if I'm here, I'm turning this foot out to the side, and my knee is going that way. It's very important you don't try and shove this leg that way as your body goes that way, but let the angular momentum go off. Yeah. And depending on people's own physicality, right, it might go 90 degrees, or it might be like or completely parallel to my opponent. You might be in a little bit. That's hard to communicate via video. I tend to default to being pretty parallel to my opponent, though. Mostly it's because if our hips are going off, right? If I'm right-handed, my right hip is going to point off to the left. My foot turns to accommodate that action. So just try it without the cut for a little bit, right? If we're standing here and we throw that mandritto, right? And try it as a volta stabile. So try it without lifting your feet, but just turning on the balls of your feet. Your back heel might go out a little bit. You're going to see a lot with this front foot. Right, and feel and go slowly. Feel how that isn't, if your knee just goes forwards, how that doesn't support the action of your hips. Right, you're gonna feel like your two legs pressing against each other as opposed to working in tandem. If you haven't already, switch feet. I know my head's cut off. Right. And try both, both the stabile and also with a step. I find it helps to land on the balls of my feet and then push my heel out, as opposed to going the other way around. Right, and especially in that volta stabile, right, we're pivoting on the balls of our feet. We're not pivoting with our heels. Our heels are bad at moving. Their heels are really good shock absorbers. Cool. I'm gonna move the camera back now. That's my water bottle. Cool. Oh, never mind. It's not my water bottle. It's my copy of Marozzo falling down. Great. So now, in however much space you have, which is going to be dependent on you, I want you to try and I want you to do 3 cuts in a row, starting with going from one guard to another and back, and then eventually going through 3 different guards. And at first, I want you to try doing them concordantly, and then eventually I'll warm you up doing them discordantly. So an example might be that I start in the square di croce, I cut down into porta di ferro larga, I cut up to guardia di croce, and I cut back down again. And I do that same sequence, stepping back and. All right, so that's 3. The Bolognese really like things being in sets of 3. All right, and then I might add a level of difficulty by starting in guardia di croce, cutting down into porta di ferro larga, and then coming down into coda longa e stretta. Or coda longa larga, or coda longa larga, whichever one. Right, so that's one. Actually, I guess it's 2. Yeah, so I cut down, I cut down here, and then as a third one, I could cut out into entrare. right? And then I have this mirrored version where I cut down, and I cut up. Cool. So if you've done them concordantly, let's try them discordantly. So if I'm in Portaferro Larga, yeah. Let's say I'm in Cinghari Portaferro Larga, actually, to make it more fun. So in Cinghari Portaferro Larga, I could cut up into Guardia di Croci. I could cut down into Cinghari Portaferro Larga again. I can cut back up into Guardia di Croci. And you can either do it if your feet mostly in line with each other or more apart. I forgot which cards I just gave you. Oh, there we go. 1, 2, 3. We can go through 3 different guards, like Cinghari, Portaferro Larga, cut up into the Croci, cut down into Portaferro Stretta, and then Portaferro Stretta, cut into like Codalonga Stretta, right? I'm gonna you can figure out 3 on your own. I'm just like making up examples. If you just do like a script that I hand you, it's really hard to improvise during a fight. So I'm actively wanting you to create your own sequences as opposed to me just handing you a bunch of them. And finally, although we've been doing it already, I'm going to give it as an added layer to think about. I want you to play with switching between the Stretta guards and the Larga guards. All right, so I can make a whole sequence where I'm in Cinghari Portaferro Stretta, and I cut discordantly into Codalonga Stretta, and then I cut discordantly into Guardia di Croci, and then I cut again, I cut into like Codalonga Larga, or Codalonga Alta, right? And my point is in presence the whole time, it leaves the camera. Right, we're going 1, 2, 3. But I can also do all Larga ones, right? I can be in Longa di Stesa, cut to Guardia Alta, which you can't see, cut down into Cinghari Portaferro Larga, and then cut down into Codalonga Larga. It's important to be able to have, and we'll go into this more later on, the versatility of working both in Stretta, which is going to be a lot more familiar with later period practitioners, as well as in Larga, which happens more in earlier period. Cool. Where are we at on time? Okay, we have 5 minutes. There's just one of you right now, but are there any questions before I run through a really fast overview of what we did? No? Everything clicking perfectly? Yeah. You can do it. You can find the unmute button.
I'm fine.
Okay.
You have a recording of this. That's fine.
Great. Cool. I'm gonna do like a 1 second overview, and then we're gonna do a quick chat, and then it'll be good for today. So, as an overview for guards, we have coda longa larga. Yeah, let's do the guards together. Coda longa larga, coda longa stretta, coda longa alta, coda longa distesa. We have porta de ferro larga, porta de ferro stretta, porta de ferro alta. We have Cinghare porta de ferro larga, Cinghare porta de ferro stretta, Cinghare porta de ferro alta. We have Guardia di Croci. We have Guardia di Entrare. We have Guardia di Testa, which we didn't really do much that much with today. And we have Guardia Alta, which is going to put a hole through my ceiling, so I'm not going to do it. Right, but note that it's hard to see it straight on, but Di Testa is going to be here. And then Alta is going to be up there. Oh, and then I don't know if I went over it earlier. We also have Guardia di Faccia, which is the guard of the face, which is just here. Right, I just sit my sword in front of my face. You use this a lot. When people cut down to your face, you'll often gather back into here. That's all of them. I might have forgotten something, but I'm sure people will remind me. And then for cuts, we have our mandritti, right, from our native or non-native side. We have our roversi from our non-native or native side. We have our fendente from the eyeball to the knee. We have our spolimbrato, more diagonal. We have our tondo, which is across. We have our rodopio, which is up. We have our falso manco. We have our falso dritto. We have our falso manco. We have our montante. Next week, well, we're going to talk about putting these more together and also learn how to thrust. It's important not to just poke people all the time, especially if you're coming from a later period system. But that doesn't mean the Bolognese didn't stab people. They stab people a lot. Stabbing people is great. Thankfully, there's a lot less thrusts than there are guards or cuts, so it'll be easier to remember. Cool. Before we close out, what's something that like clicked with you today, or like an idea that like was well presented, or like something new you didn't know before?
The terminology for the stronger structure versus the non-strong structure, which by the way hurts.
Oh yeah, the discordant cuts.
Yes.
They're weird. Yeah, they take some time to get used to, and we can definitely spend more time next week like going through how to do them. Today it was mostly everyone gets a giant load of terminology, just because it's super, like Bolognese is super hard to do without already knowing all of these terms, which like inherently takes a while. But that's good to know that like you hadn't thought of discordant, and also that it feels weird. Cool. Well, with that said, I am going to stop the recording.